One of the most misunderstood games to have come out in a long time is probably Scorn, a game that apparently a lot of people were misled to believe to be a first-person Doom-like shooter. Gee, I wonder why. Whether or not by their own perception or duplicitous marketing, the truth of the matter is that Scorn is like Myst if you set Myst in a grotesque, Geiger-esque universe where everything is flayed, f***ed, and recycled into a larger hive-mind existence that I can only assume is what lies beyond the abyss that we all find so terrifying in a Lovecraft mythos. Scorn is a walking simulator at its core, which is a genre that a lot of people probably aren't even aware exists and is largely used by the horror community to tell a story that most usually lends itself to the atmosphere that you're walking through. The genre pretty much describes itself. But there's some good stuff in there sometimes. Scorn doesn't have a narrative, at least one that lies in the literal sense. You can take an ephemeral approach to what you take out of Scorn, if you want. Me? I chose to believe that the narrative of Scorn lies in the existence of struggle with humanity, and that, spoilers ahead, in the end, the great foe of the protagonist, a strange spider-like parasite that attaches itself to you, ends up robbing you of the sweet release of death. It's kind of a metaphor of the grind of life, if you will. Anyways, spoilers over, let's continue. I could go a lot deeper into what I maybe extrapolated from the narrative of Scorn, but I think the larger point is that there isn't a story inherent other than its base struggle that you're presented with, which is to keep pushing through. The journey is the point of Scorn, as brutal and uncomfortable as it is. But there are also puzzles. Now, puzzles in walking simulators are usually the main gameplay mechanic to bring in challenge to the equation, and in horror, walking simulators often aren't the most challenging of puzzles. Such is the case with Scorn, which can occasionally throw in an obtuse curveball, but is nothing compared to the point-and-click craze of the mid-90s, where obtuse is the name of the game. If you want a true brain-busting scream at your monitor, "I hate who made this" challenge in a puzzle, try playing something like the 1996 Take-Two interactive gem Ripper starring Christopher Walken, among many other prestigious names. I'm good on puzzles after that, but I digress. You will not encounter anything as mind-bendingly obtuse as that in Scorn. Most of what Scorn has to offer in the realm of puzzles is just a simple box slider, which is a type of puzzle I didn't realize people hated so goddamn much, but apparently that's a thing. Puzzles do manage to up the difficulty a little, though not a lot. And as you progress through those puzzles, you do start to get introduced to enemies and some danger. And of course, as you're introduced to those things, you are given the means with which to defend yourself. Now, these aren't rapid-fire guns that you can mow down an entire horde of enemies with, nor will you really have hordes of enemies to contend with in the first place. You can often outwit them by simply being dexterous and move on. Eventually, however, you will reach at least one boss that you will have to defeat in order to move forward. And this is where I took some slight issue with Scorn. Now, once again, spoilers, so hang on. I find myself sometimes having this issue with endgame bosses in horror games because I feel like they manage to somehow pin themselves into a corner with the tension and the pacing and the writing that they're really not sure how to bring everything to a beautiful crescendo that's going to satisfy everybody, and that's fine. But I felt as though some of the mechanics of this boss fight in specific weren't very well thought out, and sometimes I feel that way in general with some of these horror games. I'm looking at you, Phobia. I've got a review coming for that soon. Anyways, the boss here had 3 phases meant to be puzzled out, like everything else in the game, over time. But the last phase in particular gave seemingly little to no help, and once you did figure out what the solution was, the window of opportunity was so infinitesimally small that it's not out of the question to spend 45 minutes fighting this boss. No kidding. To add insult to injury, once I defeated the boss of the game, it bugged out on me, and I had to reboot, which was something that I was really nervous about because I thought it would reset my progress to before the boss fight. Luckily, it did not, but in my trial and error approach to figuring out the boss to escape the droning hell that was the soundtrack during said boss fight, I left myself with little health to work with, and of course I ended up killing myself with a poorly placed grenade. Why am I like this? Now when I was respawned, it somehow put me before the boss fight and before the logout point where I tried to fix the game. Why there was no save state after the boss defeat is beyond me, but I had to endure what felt like another 30 to 45 minutes of droning hell to defeat this boss with a really small window one more time and a little more efficiently. It felt a bit like that encounter destroyed the pacing of the game in a lot of ways, especially with how the end shaped up to be. I think the intent was to ramp up the intensity of the puzzles with what was essentially a puzzle boss, and I'm okay with that, but perhaps give the boss a little more of a window? I don't know. I think many people are going to get frustrated with that, and hopefully not too many will go through some of the bugs that I did. Outside a few frustrations, however, I mostly found Scorn to be one of the better walking simulators that I've played in quite a while. Now, I've played a lot of those atmospheric horror walking sims, and I've played a lot of Lovecraftian horror games that invoke the art style of H.R. Giger? Who knows? I don't know. And I think Scorn is probably one of the only ones I've played that both garnered this much mainstream hype, but also garnered a lot of negative feedback for a misunderstanding of what it was going to be. I know some of the trailers featured action-esque gameplay, and perhaps that was where the misunderstanding takes root. I also personally don't tend to research games that I know I want to play beyond the initial trailer viewing, because I want to go in sight unseen and reserve my judgment and opinion for what I experience rather than what someone else experiences, which makes it funny that I espouse my opinions for these games on the internet. But as I've said in other opinion pieces, I have a job where I play a lot of games, and I know some people like to know the opinions on a game before they spend the money to check it out for themselves. I understand that, it makes sense, and it's smart. But I've also seen a lot of extremely negative feedback for games based on a perception that they had that somebody else gave them, especially with Scorn, purely based from the misunderstanding that the game was going to be a fast-paced, brutal FPS, which it definitely is not. I might actually make another video in the future with a list of some of these games that I'd recommend, but a few shooters that you could check out instead of agonizing about what Scorn is not are Vomitorium, Shrine, Forgive Me Father, Proteus, and Rot. I know that there's probably many more, so leave me a comment if there's one that I'm missing. I love Doom FPS type games. Anyways, you could also check out the Lust for Darkness series, which isn't a shooter, but it has a lot more action-oriented gameplay in it, and it has that same kind of grotesque Lovecraft vibe. It's kind of a shame that this kind of knee-jerk response happens, because the truth about Scorn is that it's a beautifully grotesque game worth your time, but only if you're interested, willing, and able to stomach the journey. If you don't like puzzle games, it's not gonna be for you. This game is not gonna be for everyone. But if you like creeping horror, a droning atmosphere, puzzles, and grotesque things, well, Scorn might be something that you want to check out. Scorn is available on PC and on the Xbox Series X and S. Check out the links below to support the stream. If you like these reviews, please consider checking out my Patreon page. Early access to these videos and much more is available. And as always, thank you for watching.